Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Minister Jacek Czaputowicz, allow me to start, first of all, by thanking the organizers and the government of Poland for hosting this forum. And I'm very pleased to be here for the first time as well. I see that this forum is giving me at least the opportunity to have a better understanding of different regions. And I think this is the way forward for all of us here to also be aware of the challenges that other regions are facing and that we need to face these challenges together as well. The theme chosen for this session, given recent developments in the European Union's southern neighborhood, is both timely and, I might add also, highly significant. Cases in point are the conflict in Syria and the instability in Libya, two of the most protracted and long-standing crises of our time, which have given rise to serious challenges both in the Mediterranean as well as beyond on the European continent. Refugee and migrant flows, security concerns, as well as radicalization and terrorism in Europe continue to absorb the attention of the European Union and its member states. And these challenges should not, however, distract our attention from developing better relations with our southern neighbors, which need to be nurtured based on a partnership agenda with joint priorities responding to the broader interests of both sides. The effects of radicalization are impinging on society's most basic rights. And this is not exclusive of any region, system, or even belief. No one nation on its own can wage an effective battle against these phenomena. An integrated approach is required to counteract the conditions that form a breeding ground for terrorism. Tackling the multiple facets of this phenomena incorporates issues of border security, combating terrorism financing, preventing radicalization, and overcoming the threat from returning foreign terrorist fighters. Effective counterterrorism strategies, along with the promotion and also the protection of human rights, are mutually supportive and linked to development. Coming to irregular migration. So far this year, arrivals of unauthorized migrants along the central Mediterranean route are around 80% lower than they were in 2017. However, the proportion of those losing their lives while trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, which has sadly become the graveyard of too many, has risen sharply. This is according to UNHCR statistics. Nonetheless, there are some welcome developments, such as the Global Compact on Migration, the first ever UN global agreement on a common approach to international migration. Malta welcomes this positive development in all its dimensions, although the absence of a reference to non-refoulement in the final text is regretted. Migration needs to be an option and not a necessity. But we have been saying this for a very long time. The time has come to do more than we say, addressing labor market gaps through the formulation of legal channels of migration, which could be regionally available, would promote more regularized migration flows while ensuring that employment is regularized and can adequately address labor shortages to the benefit of employer and employee alike. The Joint Valletta Action Plan, adopted in November of 2015, as the bedrock between Europe and Africa, has helped foster a mutual understanding of policies and provides a framework for the numerous actions being pursued. It has confirmed the overarching role of regional processes on migration, like the Rabat and Khartoum processes, for example, and encouraged also the coordination of their activities while responding to the recognition at global level that most international migration and mobility takes place within regions. In addition to the Valletta Action Plan, the Valletta Summit on Migration launched the EU Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, one of the main deliverables of the summit, which supports implementation of the action plan. Malta supports the concept of disembarkation platforms as an additional tool aimed at alleviating the migratory pressure that frontline member states are experiencing and lending predictability to these processes. If a system of fair relocation and resettlement involving all EU member states is implemented, the system can work if implemented, of course, can work if also North African countries are targeted as a priority. Of course, there is much to discuss on these issues. The several tools and policies at our disposal have the potential to provide the international community with a fresh approach. While being ambitious, we must also remain realistic. Adopting a holistic approach to address the challenges and to manage migration remains the ultimate objective. This can only be achieved through a strong partnership between states, civil society, the private sector, and other stakeholders. This is also the reason why, in the context of the European Neighbourhood Policy, Malta continues to support the concept that we do not forfeit the Mediterranean region, but at the same time, that the bar is raised for southern Mediterranean countries to aim higher. Finally, while challenges like youth disenfranchisement and economic stagnation abound, our ultimate objective should be to transform these into opportunities. So no effort should be spared to ensure that cooperation with our southern neighborhood is consolidated even further, promoting stability, peace, and prosperity in countries closest to the neighborhood's borders. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and again from the organizers, we are extremely grateful that you have made the effort to come. We believe it's truly, truly important that highest level representatives of governments from the southern neighborhood join us in those discussions to make a truly unified European security a reality, and I hope we're making progress, and I hope our foreign minister also sees this this way. Now we'd like to also welcome another special guest of the forum, looking a little bit more to the south, outside of the European Union, but an extremely important country. We'd like to invite a legend, I would say, of Israel, recently the Minister of Defense, Mr. Moshe Yaalon, to give us his short remarks. Minister, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Warsaw Security Forum for the opportunity to participate in this important forum. And it's very nice to listen to problems and challenges of others rather than to deal with the Israeli challenges in our tough neighborhood, Middle East. Nevertheless, the subject of this session is the result of the ongoing instability in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And we should assume, when we deal with it, that the Middle East of today is engaged in the most significant crisis since the days of Muhammad in the 7th century, and we shouldn't underestimate it. We don't see the end of it, and of course it's going to affect Europe, whether it is migration, terror, and other phenomena which might affect the security not just in the region, the global security as a whole. And when we talk about the impact to Europe, no doubt that Europe suffers from terror attacks coming from the Middle East, from this non-stabilized region, and the migration, whether from North Africa to Italy, Libya, generally speaking, or from other places via Turkey or other routes to reach Europe. Part of those who move to Europe, according to our understanding, trying to improve their lifestyle. We dealt with it with certain routes of those who were coming from Africa via Egypt, approaching our border, and we succeeded in blocking them by certain steps. One of them is an obstacle along the border, another, of course, more effective Egyptian activities, and other internal steps in order to block it for those who try to improve their lifestyle. We are not talking about refugees. But generally speaking, to address the issue, the way that we believe it should be addressed. First of all, regarding terrorism, we should fight it all together. And there is a need for international cooperation to deal with ISIS, whether it is coming from Iraq, from Syria, the Sinai Peninsula. We should cooperate. The lesson of 9/11 is international cooperation is the only way to address this terror phenomena. Just recently, Israeli information delivered to the French security apparatus succeeded in foiling a terror attack targeting the Iranian opposition conference in Paris. It's just one example. International cooperation fighting terrorism. When it comes to the economic and humanitarian situation of those countries, again, cooperation, to propose at least something like Marshall plans when it is relevant. Where it is relevant, it might be relevant for Sinai Peninsula, the situation of the Bedouins over there, the Egyptians understand it. It might be irrelevant to Libya, of course, in the current instable situation in Libya or in other places. But we should look to a way to address these humanitarian and economic needs for these people. Otherwise, they will storm again and again, especially Europe. Regarding what should be the target in dealing with the situation in the Middle East, we should be modest to try to reach stability, first of all. Stability meaning not looking for higher aspirations like democratization or other very nice ideas which might be irrelevant for the Middle East. First of all, stability, and looking for effective, accountable leaderships in the region. We have now the situation in the Gaza Strip. We don't like Hamas, but we have found that Hamas has become to be accountable, effective. Of course, we don't want them to be strengthened, to attack us, but we can look everywhere, to Syria, to Iraq, to Libya, to Yemen, and of course to the Palestinian arena as well, to look for stability. Then we have to deal, regarding meeting the challenge of the migration and terror, with states, members of the United Nations, members even of NATO, which in a way allows this phenomena to occur because it serves their interest. On top of it is Iran. Iran sponsoring terror. Iran is the main generator and instigator for instability in the Middle East. They meddle in Iraq, they are involved in Syria, They abducted Lebanon vis-à-vis Hezbollah. They are involved in Yemen by facilitating the Houthis, Hezbollah-like wise faction, arming them to challenge the internal situation as well as to challenge Saudi Arabia from its backyard. Iran is a member of the United Nations. The international community, keeping the international world order as a very important interest, should deal with it like that. I be critical towards Turkey as well. Hopefully it will be changed. But for a while, for a certain period of time, Turkey facilitated ISIS by buying oil from them, allowing jihadists to come from all over, especially from Europe, to join ISIS, whether in Iraq or in Syria, and to go back home as well-trained, experienced terrorists. The migration, which used to be a big issue in 2015, not just refugees, illegal immigrants from Morocco, from Pakistan, coming via Turkey, crossing the Aegean Sea to the Greek islands on the way to Europe, a phenomenon that year, more than 800,000. Again, Turkey is a member not just of the United Nations, a member of NATO. What should be done? I believe that the international community should deal with it as a threat which should be dealt even by political pressure, economic pressure in certain cases, in order to prevent and to foil this kind of phenomena. And the last point, of course, operational activities when we are not able to deal with it by the other means, especially talking about the Mediterranean Sea, from Libya to Malta to Europe, operational activities in order to foil this kind of phenomena, which is migration and terror as well. My last point, without international cooperation, there is no way to succeed in meeting this challenge, and it is so needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And without further ado, I'd like to invite the moderator of our panel, Ms. Skajewska, who's a very renowned Polish journalist with great knowledge about this issue, to invite all of the other guests and begin your conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome to all of you. My name is Magdalena Skajewska, and I will have the pleasure to moderate this session. I'd like to welcome our distinguished guests, two of which you have already had the pleasure to listen to. So, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malta, Mr. Carmelo Abela. Welcome. Thank you. The former Minister of Defense of Israel, Mr. Moshe Yaalon. Welcome. We'll also have the pleasure to hear Ms. Asli Salino-Chiei, Senior Fellow of the Istituto Affari Internazionali from Italy. Welcome. Mr. Guillermo Picchi, Under-Secretary of State from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. Welcome. And Ms. Barcin Inanç, Senior Editor from the Hurriyet Daily News from Turkey. Very warm welcome to all of you. Well, the migration debate has obviously been one of the most contentious topics in Europe. And of course, as also Minister Abela mentioned, when we look at the numbers, we can see a sharp decrease in the number of people that are trying to reach Europe. But of course, given the rising population of African continent and the instability that has also been mentioned by General Yaalon, this is the problem that will obviously be with us for a very long time. Minister Abela mentioned the integrated approach, the need for the holistic solution to the problem, and Malta has been one of the biggest, I think, proponents of this so-called European solution to the problem. I'd like to firstly ask Mr. Picchi, because we've obviously seen a huge change in the strategy or policy of the Italian government recently regarding migration. And I'm wondering whether it means that Italy has basically lost its faith in the European solution and decided to deal with the problem by itself, or maybe there is still some chance for dialogue to deal with the problem with all the other European states. Please.
Thank you. Easy question. Well, first of all, the new government decided that it's not anymore acceptable to have economic migrants entering freely and illegally the country. So that's the basic thing that we stated as new policy. And we simply not accepted anymore the concept that whoever could go within the territorial waters of Libya, get a phone call from the smugglers, and then take the people in our ports. That was the case until the new government joined in June. The results are remarkable. We are down more than 80% to last year. We are managing, I mean, all those that are within the country much more easily. And we are having, a proactive approach to all the sub-Saharan countries that were the origin countries of migration. Yes, Europe left us, basically, left us alone. We are still keen to cooperate with the European Union, but we had to act to respect our people. So the people were demanding security, and they were asking not that we have, unlimited migration in the country. So we had to act. We acted. I mean, the results are there. We are still, engaging Europe to find a solution for all the secondary migrants and to go at the root of the problem that is in the origin country. So that's our key next task, is to, call it Marshall Plan for Africa, use whatever terminology you want, but if we create the condition where first there is not anymore the expectation in these people that Europe is a free place where you can come and, enjoy free money and free job and everything, it's easy. Second, to invest heavily in those countries so that people are happy to stay where they are and we would not have all the flow upwards towards us. It's not only a problem of economic migration, it's a problem also of security.
But as for now, we can also see that one of the elements of this Italian strategy is basically refusing the safe harbor to migrant ships. Is that also this short-term strategy?
Well, we had to take some harsh positions. I mean, we are clear on that. I mean, not all of our European partners, accepted our strategy, but we highlighted that there was a huge problem, and we even demonstrated with some other countries that were accusing us. Then we're not taking any migrant, willingly. So there was a big hypocrisy throughout Europe on this specific point. We had to speak very loud. And we acted in a tough way, and I guess the lesson was learned by our partners. So now migration is among the top priorities of the European agenda.
Minister Abella, is the European solution, in your view, still possible, given the different sensitivities, different approach, basically, by 28 still member states?
Well, on the issue of migration, we need to work together. Solidarity should be there. We should not leave up to the countries that happen to be frontline countries of the European Union, especially to the south, since for the time being, at least, the migratory flow is coming from the Mediterranean, mainly the central route. So I can understand that the frustration that a country feels, because my country, Malta, especially when the challenge of migration started in the beginning of the year 2000, we felt alone to tackle a situation that was becoming day after day, even when it comes to numbers, more challenging for us. So we can understand when you try to seek help and this help is not forthcoming. Then after a number of years, the European Union realized that, you know, something is happening. The numbers became much bigger than they were in the beginning, and more member states were being affected by the migration. So then migration made it also on the agenda of the European Union. I remember that I became Minister for Home Affairs in December 2014, so I had to deal with the challenge of migration from our side. And it was very difficult also at that time to have the issue of migration on the agenda. Now, if it's not on the agenda, how we are going to tackle it together in a holistic way? So now, thankfully, it's on the agenda. Still works in progress, although I personally quoted 80% less. It doesn't mean that the challenge is not there. It's still there, the challenge. We still have to continue working together. But my appeal is that all EU member states have to be on this together, because one day is the Central Mediterranean route, another day can be another region, another route that requires the help of other member states. So we should be in this together and of course support each other on the issue and the challenge of migration. There is a lot of things to say on this issue. So, for example, the holistic approach, which means that we need to do much more in investing in countries of origin, work with these countries, countries of transit, tackle the issue of human traffickers and smuggling, because there is a criminal activity going on. So, you know, there is a multiple of action that needs to be taken.
What was on the agenda a few years ago was this very famous deal, migrant deal with Turkey that came to rescue, as some would say, and accepted some financial aid in order of help with dealing with the migration crisis. And when we look at the numbers, there is a significant decrease. Also due to this EU migrant deal with Turkey. In 2015, until the end of September, there were 370,000 migrants that came to Greece. And this year, until last Sunday, less than 26,000. So we can see a huge change. Ms. Yinanç, there are some voices saying that Turkey might not be as committed to the deal as it used to be. I'm wondering what's your take on that? How is that perceived in Turkey? And can Europe basically count on Turkey in the following years?
Well, I'm not sure about Turkey not keeping its promises or its pledges, although I would say Turkey can say that I am not going to keep it, because saying that Europe hasn't delivered on what it promised. Now, I know that the Turkish authorities from time to time are saying that the financial assistance hasn't been flowing as quickly as they were expecting, etc. But on the other hand, there is some money flowing. But, for instance, the deal had also included that some of the refugees will be taken by European countries. So that pledge from the European Union was not delivered. As I said, on the financial aspect, you know, the mechanism has started to work, but the Turkish side is still complaining about it. And also Turkey was expecting that the Turkish-EU relations will also be revitalized, and that wasn't fulfilled as well. So, you know, Turkey could come and say, well, you haven't delivered your promises, so maybe I should stop on mine. But I think the Turkish side's approach to Syrian refugees is a bit independent of of the deal, whether the deal is there or not. I think from day one, Turkey had endorsed an open door strategy. As of today, there is a switch from approaching Syrian refugees as an emergency problem, as a temporary problem, as a problem that would go away in 2 years' time because they will go back. Now there is this understanding that the Syrian refugees are here to stay in Turkey, and therefore there are programs that are being endorsed. At the initial stages, there was resistance of, providing education in Turkish, for instance, again with the expectation that they might go back. Now the children are enrolled in schools. They are being taught Turkish. 60% of children at schooling ages are in Turkish schools, and I am being told that 100%, there is 100% enrollment for those who are at the age of starting schools. But numbers are fine, but do they get quality education? That's another thing. So there are lots of challenges awaiting the Turkish government, and I think the Turkish government is designing its strategies independent of whether the deal is there or not.
And could that particular EU-Turkey deal be like an example, in your view, for other deals that the EU would like to have with some African countries as well? What do you think?
Well, the financial assistance is obviously an important aspect to deal with the issue. Now, the positive side in the Turkish case is that compared to maybe some other countries, there are certain, the Turkish institutions are more resilient, they're more prepared, so that the European Union could come up and see certain programs get implemented very, very quickly. To give you an example, for instance, in Turkey, there's a scheme for sending children to school, especially girls, because in rural places in Turkey, sometimes families, they don't want to send their girls to schools, but there was a campaign where families with low income were proposed financial assistance so that they will send their girls. Now the same is being applied for Syrian refugees. So the program was already there. All the international organizations had to do, especially the EU and the UNICEF, was to endorse these kind of programs. So these kind of best practices could be an example to other countries, but do the other countries have the same absorption capacity as Turkey? I doubt it.
In February next year, we're supposed to have a meeting, a summit between the European Union and Arab states in Egypt on migration particularly, and there are a lot of ideas floating around how to deal also with Arab states and African states on that issue. Ms. Okay, what would you expect from that summit, and what are the prospects of the cooperation with the African and Middle Eastern states? Because, for example, the idea of having reception centers in some North African countries has been floated around, but it has not gained any support in those particular countries.
Well, let me start with that, the disembarkation platforms, the regional disembarkation platform idea, that variants of it actually have been around before, like hotspots, extraterritorial processing centers, etc., from the EU side. But it has gained traction, let's say, after the EU Council this June, and it has been almost immediately, we can say, and quite vehemently rejected, opposed by Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, and also Egypt, I think. So we can understand, I mean, when I was listening to the ministers on both my sides, I think there the problem is not so different than the problem or the debates we are having inside Europe as well, in terms of solidarity, fair burden sharing, mutual interests of the parties involved in this in the management, joint management of this issue. So in that sense, well, of course, from that summit, what we will expect is going to be what we will expect is that there's going to be, I hope, there's going to be honest discussion, really taking into account the interests and the priorities of both sides. And as I said, focusing really on a regional issue, trying to solve it as well as at the southern and the northern shores of the Mediterranean and beyond, as the minister also said. So obviously there is what the EU needs to do is also to be clearer, I think, in terms of what this idea exactly entails. For example, what are the implications in terms of return, resettlement? The EU needs to be credible because, as Ms. Inanç was also saying, when you say, okay, the processing will take place there, but then some of it will be resettled. And all these ideas are about solidarity and burden sharing, again, as I said, regionally. So everybody has to keep to their promises and share properly if you want to expect something constructive.
Yes, but the idea of cooperating further with Africa, again, is not new. I was at the summit in Valletta, I think it was in 2015, with the African countries. But it seems like the negotiations or the talks are stalled at some point, or how does that look from your perspective, Minister?
I think that the best thing to approach this subject is that Europeans and Africans are equals and partners. I think African countries do not like the idea that we approach them because we have an issue with migration. So we need to be equal partners and that we talk in an honest way on every subject, including investing in countries of origin, including in cooperation, to be honest partners with them. So that is from their perspective as they would like to see us Europeans. So it's not like an issue that we approach African countries because we have a challenge, an issue with migration, and we try to approach them to solve this issue. We need to work together. Let's remember that the African continent is a very young continent. The vast majority, I think more than 60%, are people under the age of 30. So there is a challenge for employment, there is a challenge and there is a need to have more investment in this continent. So that is one way, if we want to have less migrants coming to Europe, is by providing work. And as I said earlier, migration should not be a necessity, but should be a choice. Now we are not giving them a choice. Now we know that we need to differentiate between those who seek refuge because they are experiencing political instability or some kind of war or lack of stability in their country or in their region against economic migrants. But we need to have more understanding of the situation. Also, we need to be aware that there is a lot of migration within African countries as well. And I think it's something that we don't really appreciate enough, in my opinion. So, as also President Juncker said in his speech, the State of the Union, that we need to look in a different way to the African continent. And by this kind of relationship, I think that we can achieve more when it comes also to the challenge of migration.
Mm-hmm. Minister Yalın, you said very bluntly that without the international cooperation, Europe cannot deal with that issue, cannot address this challenge. From your perspective, what should be the priorities that Europe should stress on in dealing with the migration crisis? During your speech, you mentioned several interesting things, like, for example, the Marshall Plan. That is also one of the ideas.
The first steps that should be taken, according to my understanding, is to address the humanitarian needs in the countries. Now, we did it until recently with Syrian refugees. Syrian refugees, the humanitarian crisis because of the ongoing civil war, came to our border in the Golan Heights asking to open the door and to have refugees camps in our side. We decided to address all their humanitarian needs in their homes. We are talking about 200,000 villagers living across the border in the Golan Heights. We provided them with food, oil, blankets, clothes, shoes, medical treatment on the border, hospitalizing them in our hospitals. After recovery, we send them back home. That's one option. Jordan decided to open the border, and they have now more than 1 million Syrian refugees in a certain perimeter along the border, living in camps, and there is an international effort to address their humanitarian needs over there, not to send them to Europe. Unfortunately, what had happened, as I mentioned earlier, from the northern part of Syria, with Turkey as facilitator in it, shouldn't have happened. I paid a visit to Greece February 2016 in my former capacity as a defense minister. And I was briefed about the situation, which I mentioned, 800,000 illegal immigrants coming from all over via Turkey, 5 mile sailing from Turkey to the Greek islands in the agency, rubber boats, and then they are in Europe. And I said, illegal immigrants, refugees? They said, no. Only 40% of them were refugees coming from Iraq and Syria, from war. Moroccan guys. A description of a 22 years old Moroccan guy coming to this island using this system, taking selfie to encourage his friends and relatives to follow him on the way to whatever, Frankfurt, Paris, and so forth. He's not a refugee. And he told that he paid only $50 to fly from Marrakesh to Istanbul. Who did subsidize it? And asked, what do you do with the Turks? And the answer was, we delivered to the Turkish intelligence a list of more than 1,200 smugglers by names. I saw it. What was the Turkish response? Denial. In these cases, we have an accountable government which would have dealt with the situation in a different way. Whether to have such a perimeter like in Jordan, or to address the humanitarian needs of the refugees in Syria or Iraq on their side, but of course not to allow illegal immigrants to come from Morocco or from Pakistan on the way to Europe. That's all those options I just talked about in my introduction.
So helping people at their countries of origin also. That is obviously one of the elements of the long-term strategy, but before that's put into practice, we've got some short-term goals as well. And the migration issue is becoming always a very hot topic before elections in any countries or in Europe. And I would like to give my last question on the more political note, because we've got the European Parliament elections coming, and migration has already become one of the big issues of this debate. My question to Minister Piqué is that, would you expect migration to be at the center of this debate before the European elections? What impact do you think that will have on the final vote?
It will be a huge impact. Huge will be, among the top, felt things by the voters. So I think that the impact will be very relevant. Any election in Europe in the last 4 years gave a clear, direction and a clear indication of what might happen at the European elections at the end of May. Even in countries where you have full employment, great economic growth, you have, tensions, and you have, certain parties that are rising from 0 to 15, 20, 25%. We see it in any election. So I see that there will be surprises at the elections, and it's even my I'm fully involved in I'm a political actor. I'm involved in party politics. And I expect that there will be a shift of numbers in terms of results from what has been the traditional governance of the European Parliament, because we are talking of the governance of the European Parliament and of the Commission, and there will be a shift in a different direction from what we have seen so far.
Yet many people would say that it's no longer a migration crisis that we're witnessing right now, it's more a political problem. In the European Union, again, given all the numbers, and Europe has many more problems than just migration that have to be tackled.
Well, it's very complex. So European elections are not going to be just for migration. I mean, you have a number of issues, of priorities of what you want to do of this European Union. I mean, there are big limits. There is the problem of the currency of the European Central Bank, the governance of the integration we have done so far is not making the European people that happy. If you have a big shift in votes, I mean, the first question you have to pose is why people are deciding in another direction, respect of what a number of governments decided so far. So I guess there will be hot discussion on all the points. I mean, of the budget of the European Union, I mean, where the money should be spent. That's a key point. I mean, there are netto contributors to the European Union, and there are receivers, and we have to discuss even that. So on the table, I remember that after the financial crisis, there are still 40 million people throughout the European Union that are below the level of poverty. Mm-hmm. And we have to address this. And this is going to be a key factor in the results of the election.
So very interesting discussion indeed coming up before the elections. Before we end up this debate, we'll have still some time for Q&A. If there is anyone who would like to take the floor. Mr. Popovsky, maybe you would like to give your remarks to the panel. Mr. Maciej Popovsky from the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Maciej Popovsky. I'm the Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement. I'm in charge of migration, which is a tough job. Just 4 brief comments. I mean, it's a no-brainer that migration is a priority for us. And it's also not only at the political level, it's also reflected in the setup of policy instruments, in the fact that we have a new trust fund, I mean, the one mentioned by Minister Bela, and the facility for refugees in Turkey, delivering good results. I mean, it's not maybe not very modest to say because I'm in charge of it, but we really managed to spend 2 billion euros, real money, since March 2018, which is by European standard speed of light. Secondly, we are not in that alone, so we can only achieve results indeed if we engage with countries of origin and transit, but also we have to do things on the ground together with the member states. We have to rely on their expertise. I have to say that we've built an excellent relationship with the Italian administration. We managed to agree on a plan of action for Libya with the Ministry of Interior, which is now being implemented. And for the first time in history, we are going to use European money to train Libyan coast guards, to buy them boats and equipment that they need to be more efficient. And they are more efficient. And one of the reasons why the numbers have dropped is exactly the kind of engagement that I described. There is a clear link to the internal debate, the burden sharing, the reform of the European asylum system. I'm not going to comment on that. This is not my responsibility. But I would just say that we cannot have a lasting solution to the challenge without opening up possibilities of legal migration into the European Union to reduce pressure at source, which is very delicate, I have to admit. And finally, I mean, I would say that the challenge is triangular. I mean, first of all, we are dealing with real people who got stuck in, whether it's in Libya or in Jordan or Lebanon. We have to take care of them. That's the humanitarian angle. And we do that through spending money on building schools, and the results are good. And I can fully confirm that the Turkish government has done a tremendous job, and we really try to help them to be as efficient as possible. Then is the partnership with the countries of origin. That's the essence of the Valletta partnership, so that they can help us address the challenge. But finally, it's also more and more focus on border management. This is relatively new. That started 2 years ago. Now all the leaders in Europe realize that we also have to invest in better protection of European border, hence the proposal by the European Commission to strengthen the powers of the European Border and Coast Guard based in Warsaw and known as Frontex, and also to put much more effort on the protection of the European border and the borders of the neighboring countries. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hello, Teresa Fallon from the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. I have a question for Dr. Picchi. I hope Picchi. China, I'm sorry. Anyway, China recently announced that it was willing to work with Italy to deal with refugees and migrants from Africa. Can you maybe stretch that out a bit? I'm really curious what that means because the press hasn't really covered it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, just a number. I mean, Italy never faced a refugee problem. We have 92% of economic migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. So to deal with the refugees, I mean, we are open to cooperate with whoever, including China. The idea is China is investing heavily in Africa. They announced the plan of 60 billion investment. So we are present in Africa in a number of, through our cooperation. So, I mean, the idea is to develop together a number of cooperation deals in areas where are real refugees. That's what it's all about. We have traditionally, good relationship, good cooperation in international development with a number of countries in Africa. In this specific case, we are cooperating with China on the specific field of refugees, bearing in mind that, refugee was never an emergency for Italy, never, because we always swallowed all the refugees possible from Eritrea, Somalia. We never had Afghans, Iraqis, or Syrians, or very few numbers.
Just a quick follow-up, because at the same time, the government announced that they were no longer going to support the foreign direct investment screening mechanism, which it's for everybody, but obviously China, that would affect China. So the Italian government said they will no longer support that when they were originally one of the first 3 member states to draft it, Germany, France, and Italy. So is this related at all?
I would say no. I mean, there's no direct relation. I mean, we are reviewing all the mechanisms. I mean, we are... all our policies the new government are, under review, simply because, I mean, not everything worked properly so far. So my government took a halt in a number of things, and this, as is normal, I mean, when there is a new administration, we take a break, we check, and if something was useful, we keep on doing it. If something, I mean, didn't work as it should, we stop it.
I think we have, one more question.
Constante Geberti, CFR. Undersecretary Picchi, your government, actually the previous government, had signed an agreement with a number of Libyan militias to hinder the movement of migrants towards the Libyan coast. It's also training Libyan coast guards, which are an expression of another militia. Does your government collect data on the number of people who were illegally detained, sold into slavery, raped, or murdered as a result of those hindering actions? And Minister Yalon, you mentioned this 22-year-old Moroccan in Greece, who, as you said, was not a refugee. Could you tell us how did you determine he was not a refugee, or was his national origin sufficient to determine that?
Mr. Picchi, please.
Well, I mean, we had an agreement with the legal government, the recognized government of Libya, not with militias. I mean, the recognized government by the UN, and with them, I mean, we set up a deal to give them vessels, training, and help to monitor their coast. It proved to be effective so far. I mean, high number of people were saved at sea by the Libyan coast guards. We are putting all our political pressure, and we put also money and an hospital, a field hospital in Libya, to help the people on the ground. Italy cannot accept from anyone lessons on human rights or other related stuff. We took the highest number of people at sea than any other European country, 650,000 people. We are pushing on the Libyan authorities to treat the people in the best possible way, and we put real money in that. I've not seen other countries that did the same, and all this, the mess started back in 2011 when some other European countries wanted to mess with Gaddafi.
We in Israel, we are very sensitive to the issue of refugees. Going back to the ship of Vietnamese years ago that were absorbed in Israel, are now our citizens. And when it comes to the phenomena or the flow of illegal immigrants, to include a couple of refugees coming from Africa, we looked at it very carefully. Who might be considered a refugee? Of course, one who can't go back to his homeland because of war or whatever there. That should have been the case, as I mentioned, the flow from Turkey to Greece. Those who came from Iraq and Syria, refugees, because of the war there. From Morocco, shouldn't be considered a refugee, like Pakistan should be considered a refugee. And that's the distinction and the difference.
Are there any other questions? Yes, I think we have time for one more. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Chmielewska. I work at the European Institute of the Mediterranean, and I have a question to General Yalon. So, thank you for your introductory remarks. It gave me a lot of food for thought, but I want to pick on your statement that the key issue now in the Middle East is to guarantee the stability. So I understand that, well, I want to focus on Egypt, since I understand this is one of key partners for Israel right now. So the repression now under Sisi is worse than it was under Mubarak, and everyone knows that. Every day we see a lot of news of new imprisonment. Recently, an author of a book was imprisoned as well because he was criticizing economic reforms in Egypt. So one may ask that maybe cooperating with Sisi regime and overlooking somehow those human rights breaches may be rather a short-term strategy to maintain stability, and maybe in the longer term we can witness bigger waves of protests that we witnessed in 2011 of just repressed civil society. So I wanted to hear your opinion about that. Thank you.
Nothing is perfect, especially in the Middle East. And when I spoke earlier about looking for stability, that's, I believe, the only realpolitik way to deal with the Middle East. We in Israel, we wish to have more democracies around us. It's not going to happen in the coming future. If the culture, the mentality, you don't sanctify human lives, how can you talk about human rights and women's rights or tolerance or whatever? This is the case. The idea of democratization is a very good idea. We are in favor of it. It's not going to happen in the Middle East in the coming future. We as Westerns should promote it. We should propose these ideas. Of course, it is first of all a matter of education, which might be a process, a very long one, decades, generations, if at all. For meanwhile, we have to look at the situation in a realpolitik way and to try to look for stability, first of all. Just thinking about Egypt controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. They won the elections by democratic way. Democracy is just elections? Forget about it. We have the experience with Hamas. We call it one person, one vote, once, no second chance to any opposition. They killed the opposition. This is not democracy. So as Westerns, we should propose these ideas. We should try to promote these ideas for meanwhile, to look for stability based on realpolitik.
And with
May I just jump in though?
Sure.
I think it's not just enough to promote. I think when there is a human rights violation, it's very important for Western countries to severely criticize it as well. I'm coming from a country where a Saudi dissident journalist has been allegedly murdered, and it's probably a state-sanctioned murder. And when I see some Western governments rushing to Saudi Arabia summit, that obviously that culture wouldn't change. That culture will stay there if some Western countries do not severely criticize such violations of human rights. Thank you.
And with that note, I think we will have to end this discussion. Thank you very much to all the distinguished speakers, and thank you to you all.